Awesome. Okay, my next topic. Okay, my next topic is, how do you recognize a toxic person? So, we talked, as I said, I wanted to talk about toxic workplaces. So before I talk about this, what I wanted to say was that there's a difference between a, a workplace filled with harassment or a workplace that's abusive, right? That is a different level of extremity. And I would hope that anyone that is in one of those kinds of workplaces realizes that that's beyond unhealthy and needs to be addressed. And I think you know what those situations look like, right? It is much more when you're in the realm of a legal situation, when they're really just horrible, abusive places. And it's awful, but they do exist. And I know people that have worked in those types of places, and no different than abusive relationships. It's amazing how long people will actually stay with an abusive workplace, that they feel trapped. But one of the topics that came up in the question that I have was that very often a toxic workplace is really a toxic person, and that there's a wide range of how those people play out. Sometimes it is just someone that you pass in the hallway who is, is particularly negative and who you just don't want to be around. Sometimes it's a more senior person where they actually set a tone for the workplace more broadly. So I think that's the one we're probably more concerned with, and that was certainly the question that I got. So first, to get everybody level set, I just want to cover, how do you recognize a toxic person? What is a toxic person? And so a few things. One of the things is that they switch their moods consistently. Where I remember I've worked with people like this for sure before. And one of my favorite things I always used to do is I would come up to their assistant if I had a meeting, and I would say, what's his mood today? Scale of 1 to 10, where are we? And she'd say, oh, he's actually in a great mood today. Or I don't know, can you come back? This might not be the best day for that. It's amazing how toxic a person who is moody, what they do to the workplace. So if you see this, it's consistent, then that is an example of someone who can be quite toxic in a workplace. The second is that they're manipulative. Sometimes when you're the victim of it, you don't recognize it as much. So part of the key is to look out for when they do it to other people, and keep an eye out for that. I have seen all versions of this. I've seen lying as one of the more obvious ones. And when it happened to me, I was really quite surprised. I think I'm one of those people that always, awards positive intent to people. So it's really hard to all of a sudden imagine someone could actually be lying to you and actually not be telling you the truth and saying, oh, no, I'm going to present that. I'm going to share that with them. Thank you so much for giving it to me. And then I find out later, oh, no, they haven't really done it. So that is quite common. They project. So if you know someone that, projecting is really interesting, because what happens is that they will behave a certain way. So let's say they get, they're hostile or tense or short with you. And then you end up getting caught up in it, and you mirror it back and you say, well, I was just doing this. This is why I had it. And they say, why are you so crazy? Why don't you calm down? Why are you so upset about it? So they're taking their own behaviors, and they either, one, trap you into behaving quite similarly, or two, they project their own behaviors back onto you. So they could be also a little bit more subtle, where they're like, I know you're a bit nervous about that. And you're thinking, I'm not actually nervous about that. So that's something to watch out for as well. They make you prove your loyalty. This comes in the form very often of making you make hard decisions. So it's like in a relationship. I mean, this can be outside of the workplace as well, but it's a person who would say, well, if you loved me, blank. In the workplace, it takes a little bit more of the form of, well, are you going to go to your sister's wedding, or are you going to get this project done, right? Again, I'm exaggerating for the point, but proving your loyalty. They don't apologize. Or they, I won't want to say they never apologize because we don't like to be extreme because that's a toxic person. But they just, as a general rule, they're not, you don't hear I'm sorry quite all that often, right? They're much more the type of people that will continue to dig the hole deeper, right? And will continue to justify their behavior. And I've coached a lot of people like this, peers mostly in the workplace before, where if they would lash out at one of their own people or even sometimes my people, because as a chief operating officer, my team always supported so many of the other groups, and very often they'd get snapped at. And the first thing I would do is I would walk in and say, I know you're going to yell at me for, losing my temper. And I'd say, no, I'm not. I'm not going to yell at you for losing your temper. Did you apologize? And they'd say, let's start with that. Just if we could apologize, I think we could go a lot further along this conversation. Next one. They show up in your weak times and vanish in your glory. Do you know those kinds of people where they're there in quite a supportive way, right? To say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. What can I do? How can I be there? But then when something amazing happens to you, they're nowhere. They're not the person who shows up and says, awesome job, this was great, I'm so impressed, I love it. They're always there for you to, and it's a form of passive aggressiveness, which I think is probably the next one, which is that they get to seem like, I'm helping you, I'm here for you, but what they really do is enhancing your weakness and enhancing you when you're down, right? It's like, instead of kicking you down when you're down, they're patting you while you're down. It's really awful. They give you the silent treatment. I think that one goes without saying exactly what that is. It can take multiple forms. Sometimes I had someone where that we would go back and forth, and I never get into these fights anymore, but like back and forth on a text chain or an email chain, and then they just blank you. They would just vanish, right? Now, there's people that were actually used to work for me would even do this. And I thought, which just evaporated, right? And then just boom, not another word about it. Usually when they start losing the argument, that particularly happens. But the silent treatment is really a horrible thing that you can look out for. Passive aggressive, as I said, I knew that was coming because passive aggressive, my gosh, it's one of the worst where I can't even think of an example right now. But one of my favorites is when particularly when they say something with a tone that sounds that something they say that would be nice, like, oh, how was your weekend, right? And or you hear that it's laced with, you didn't work that weekend and they worked all weekend and you didn't get anything done. And so then later in a meeting, you're saying, well, why are you all over me about not getting that done on time and this and that? I know you thought I didn't work all weekend. They're like, what are you talking about? All I asked you was, how was your weekend? Right? So that's one of my favorite examples of passive aggressiveness, where they say something, neutral, and they can always claim that it was neutral, but they were saying it with a certain aggression. They exaggerate the never, the always, it's the worst ever. They love to complain about the organization or other people in really extreme ways. And going with that, judgmental, always going after other people, or like I said, the company. We'll keep going. So what do you do about them? And I'm going to zip through these a little bit quicker because I think that there's, every situation is quite individual, and it's really hard to, unless I'm in your shoes and it's a particular and I'm there seeing it, it's really hard for all of these to necessarily apply. So you have to pick and choose depending on what the situation is and who the person is. One of the techniques we've always used is to respectfully disagree, right? Just say to someone, actually, you can use those words, I respectfully disagree, right? And to try to end a disagreement or a fight in a quite respectful way, however you need to, in the way that you communicate with that person. But you really, when you start going down a rabbit hole with someone who's toxic, you will eventually end up just pulling your hair out. The other trap is not to get defensive, right? That just recognizing that this person is coming at you from a stance of negativity and from a stance of whether it's passive aggressiveness or however that negativity brings it, to not get defensive about it, right? To try to maintain your own ground and to maintain your own strength in the situation. I think it's really important to be conscious of how they make you feel. So really being aware of both the physical issues, the mental issues, because consciousness, and once you really realize how that person is affecting you, it gives you the power to move past it. Because once you're able to say, gosh, just seeing this person in a meeting room makes my stomach turn, it goes away. The next time you see them in the meeting, you're like, I know, this person's going to make my stomach turn. It doesn't happen anymore. It's quite amazing, actually. So once you acknowledge it, and once you actually realize they make you tense, they make you pull your shoulders up, whatever it is about how they impact you, you're able to actually control it. It's quite miraculous that way. Another thing we love to do is we like to say, well, the reason she's that way is because, the reason he's that way is because this happened to him, or this is the life that they had, or, you know, she's the only woman in a team of men, and so she has to be thicker skinned or tougher or meaner, or whatever it is. You don't make excuses for toxic people. It just gives them way too much room to continue the behavior and too much power over yourself. So we just can't do that. And speaking of yourself, we just have to put ourselves first, right? So once you're aware of how they make you feel, once you're aware of how they make you react, how do you unravel that, right? So how do you make sure that you're saying, okay, what do I need to do for me so I don't feel that way, so that I don't behave that way, so that they don't pull me down with them? And really put yourself first. Don't try to fix them. It goes with don't make excuses for them, which is, and by the way, I will be quite honest with you, this was my favorite thing. I always tried to do this, right? And I had a little bit of success, to be honest, with some people, but you just can't fix everybody. And you can't, like, it would take you so much, you're not a psychotherapist, right? And it would take you so much to really understand what is driving a person and their own insecurities. That it's not your job to fix it. It really isn't. It's your job to try to make as healthy of a work environment as you possibly can. And like I said, with my one colleague that I gave you the example, where I walked into his office and said, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not even going to talk. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm not going to try to fix why he is the way he is. All I said was, could you from now on, could you apologize? And what was amazing is that not only did he start apologizing, he actually knew that if he lashed out again, he was going to have to apologize. And his lashing out actually slowed down. So just by picking that one thing, again, this wasn't a boss, or this wasn't someone who worked for me, it was a peer. But just by picking that one thing, where I was able to say, could you just do this one thing, right, for my team? Could you just apologize? By picking that one thing. Another example is, in the past, I've coached people when they say, gosh, this person is always just bad mouthing everybody else. And, it really pulls me down. And I don't want to nod, because then I look like I'm complicit, and I don't want to fight back because I don't want to be responsible for defending everyone. But other than avoiding them, I don't know what to do. And so I said, just come up with a phrase that you can say every single time, like, that just sounds neutral, like, I respect your opinion, but I just can't go there, right? So, and remove yourself, right? And so the more you just come up with a catchphrase like that, I respect your opinion, but I just can't go there, right? So that you're not being aggressive back to the person, but you're just shutting them down in a kind way. It stops. It's amazing. People will just say they can't go there, so I'm not gonna try to bring them there. So that's my caveat to don't fix them, is that if you could just find those small things to neutralize the situation, you'd be surprised. Sometimes it changes their behavior. It doesn't necessarily fix the root cause. Limit your time together, right? That's quite obvious. One is, you have to try to minimize interface as much as possible. Find an exit goes with that. Last two are really important ones. First, remember you aren't to blame. So I think it's really easy in these types of situations. I had a time where I had a boss whose assistant was really unkind to me. And every time I walked over, she was just like, wouldn't look up from her computer. She was just didn't like me. And I really couldn't understand why. And I kept trying to undo, what did I do? What did I say? When did I upset her? And I racked my brain constantly. What did I do that was disrespectful? And so finally one day I said, I can't take it anymore. I just have to ask her. And I came up and I said, listen, can I just have your attention for a second? And she looked up from her computer, and I said, whatever I've done, I apologize. I promise you, I never meant to be mean or disrespectful or hurtful. I clearly have done something in the past, and I swear to you it was unintentional. And in that particular situation, she literally looked at me like I had two heads and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, I just have the impression that I've upset you at some point. And she argued back, no, I don't know why you think that and this, that. Well, let me tell you, from that moment forward, we had the best relationship because, as a matter of fact, I recently ran into her like a couple, and this is like more than 15 years ago. We recently ran into each other. I got a big hug and the whole thing. And it was amazing. It was just one of those things where she clearly had some issue with me. It wasn't necessarily anything I had done, but by bringing it out into the open, I completely neutralized the situation. But it was hard. For the longest time, I used to dread. I used to like peek around the corner looking to see like if she would get up from her desk so I could run to go see him without having to like stop at her desk. That was awful. How can you behave? Like, how can you have a job like that? So remember, you aren't to blame. This isn't your fault, and don't try to figure out what you're supposed to be doing differently necessarily. And the last most amazing, powerful thing is to forgive. Someone recently taught me that when you have actually. The example was a person had had someone steal from them. They had a business manager that had robbed them, and they went to a court case and the whole thing. And when he finally got to court and he looked across the room and saw the other person sitting there, a person who had done this to him and stolen all his money, he finally said, you know what, I'm just going to forgive him. I'm not going to hold a grudge anymore. And what was amazing was that by taking away, by cutting that chain, he said, I carried no bad feelings anymore because I removed the power that person then had over me by saying, you don't have any, you can't hurt me anymore, right? What you did to me was a bad thing, but I forgive you. Like, I'm just over it. And so it's amazing how powerful getting over something can make the entire situation. The other person, they don't know whether you've forgiven them or not. You don't have to be passive aggressive and say, by the way, I forgive you for what you did. It doesn't matter how they feel. That is their own problem, right? The whole point is that by forgiving them, you break all the ties that they had over you, all the negative power that they had over you. It's quite an amazing thing. So that is what I had to say about toxic workplaces, and toxic people.